This mini lesson will cover active reading and annotating. We're going to look at these two concepts together because they do go hand in hand and create kind of a 1-2 punch that will set a foundation for our course. Now, first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to emphasize in terms of active reading. And this comes from Keller. We're going to emphasize connection, practice, and metacognition. So not active in the sense of you're going to read on a treadmill, active in the sense that you're going to actively work to make connections with the content of the text. This can be really challenging in academic writing and reading because oftentimes we might feel bored with a text. But just like exercise, the more you practice, the more endurance you build, and the better you're able to make those connections. Part of how we practice and build that endurance will be thinking about the marks or the annotations we make on each page and each paragraph. The third thing we're going to emphasize in terms of active reading is metacognition, or thinking about our own thinking. We'll use reflective writing to monitor our own reading process, and what you monitor, that's what you manage. So we're going to be able to manage our progress in reading as we monitor it with our metacognition. So when we think about active reading, we're going to consider this quote from Newkirk. I'll read through it and then I'm going to take a minute to dwell on some of the pieces. Good readers are active and strategic. They pose questions, build predictions, visualize, infer, and fit what they read into wider patterns. They monitor their reading. In effect, they can watch themselves determine when something doesn't make sense or when they have lost the draft of what they have read. They pay attention. And good readers read a lot. There is an undeniable correlation between reading practice and reading skill. So these are going to be our kind of headlines here. Good readers are active and strategic. Those are going to be our mottos. And then this list that Newkirk poses, the questions, predictions, visualizations, inferences, fitting what they read into wider patterns, and monitoring, those are going to be what we're going to use as our building blocks for active reading. I'll show you what I mean. First of all, what does it mean to annotate? Well, the definition of annotate is to make or furnish critical or explanatory notes or comments. So we get the note part, that's in the word itself. Critical or explanatory, these things are either going to be analytical, thinking about the quality of what's been written, or explanatory, saying back or expanding on or connecting to what's been said in the text. Now, before we get into those building blocks, I just want to take a moment to say annotation styles can be very personal, and it's important, especially as we go through this course, that you develop your own system. You might be bringing into this course styles and little habits and things that you tend to mark from other classes. Your prior knowledge about how to annotate a text certainly will come into this class. I'm hoping that you'll pick up a few new things that might help expand your annotating practice. You might find that there's something that you're bringing with you, some prior knowledge, that doesn't really work for you anymore. Maybe there's going to be something that you're going to learn in this class that's going to help you revise a practice that you already have. Either way, you got to develop your own system. First of all, for deciding what to highlight or underline. So this is what's called non-linguistic marks. These are like symbols or highlights or underline. The one thing we want to avoid is highlighting an entire text. Because if the whole thing is highlighted, then nothing is highlighted. You know what I mean? You want to be able to use these non-linguistic marks for meaning, to be able to draw your attention back to something that was particularly meaningful, and you want it to be able to stand out from the rest of the text. Another thing that you want to develop in your own annotation system is what you're going to write in the margins or on the page of a notebook. This is stuff that's going to address the content, the features, the situations, and this is where those building blocks are going to come into play as well. And then you want to develop your system for what to do when you're stuck. If you come across a word you don't know, are you going to use context clues? Can you actively look up definitions, jot down their meaning? How can you keep yourself going when you get stuck? All of these things I'm going to say are going to be really personal. I'm going to give a bunch of suggestions and then we're going to go from there. You pick up the things that seem to work for you. Maybe you try something out in one project and it doesn't work. So then you set it aside and maybe try something new for the next project. Now, here's those building blocks. What do we make notes of? So I'm drawing this directly from the Newkirk quote that we looked at a couple slides ago. We're going to make note of questions that we have. We're going to make note of our predictions. We're going to note our inferences or conclusions that we draw from the evidence presented. We're going to make note of our connections to wider patterns, and we're going to make note of our reflections. So to get into a little bit more detail, questions about the content, the form, or the style of the text. Content is the what. What is the writer saying? So this is where you could question their claim altogether. Do you agree? Are you not sure about what the author is claiming? Form is thinking about how it's set up, the organization or the genre features, what makes it look like what it is. Why is this example here? Why did the writer organize it this way? Why did they put in a hyperlink to this other site? And then we can note our questions about how it's affecting us. So these are what are called rhetorical notes. How is the writer expressing his or her ideas? Why is it so formal? Why use this vocabulary word? Now, when we write down predictions, these can look a lot like questions, but they're just questions about what is going to happen in the rest of the text. So, will this be explained more? Will they cite this important scholar? What is this getting at? How will evidence connect to this claim? It's a tool. Predictions are a question tool that helps us see if our expectations are going to be met in that text. You can also make predictions about what other scholars might say or counter arguments. Now, inferences, I know when I said that earlier, y'all were like, what now? This is a word that we don't use very much, and it has a really specific meaning to it. So what I did here was I zoomed in. I want to make my color a different color here. Inferences, if you remember, are conclusions that we, the reader, come to based on evidence, not based on an explicit statement. So I really zoomed in here on an inference that I made in that same page that I showed you earlier. And the sentence that I based it on is this one. And I'm going to read it to you as soon as I finish underlining it. Additionally, peer mentoring programs appear to define their programs based off of older and commonly used business and organizational definitions. So that's just a piece of evidence talking about where the structure of many peer mentor programs comes from, businesses and organizations. And my inference here is that educational peer mentoring programs need to break away from that. So that's a conclusion I came to based on the evidence that was offered in this sentence. That's what an inference is. You come to your own conclusion based on the evidence. Think of yourself as Sherlock Holmes, and based on the evidence, you come to conclusions. Now, another interesting and really important thing to note is these connections to wider patterns. So we're connecting text to self, text to other texts, and texts to the world. All three of these are wider patterns of experience, other scholars, and current events or things that are happening, patterns, established practices in the world. So here's another article. This is a different one. And I'm making some connections on this page that I really wanted to highlight for you. So one of the things that I highlighted over here with a little star is this sentence about learning communities who are trying to combat attrition, and this is part of our reason we do a composition learning community here at Wayne State. And so I'm making a text to self connection, connecting what's in this text to my organization. Over here, there is a quote from this Pegeen Powell. Pegeen, what a great name. But the quote made me think of another scholar named Yuri Bronfenbrenner. And you'll see here that I wrote a little CF period. That is short for cross-reference. Cross-reference means I'm going to connect it to another text. So I wrote CF Bronfenbrenner here because that scholar makes me think of this scholar and vice versa. And then here's another, we could call this a text to self connection because it deals with my organization and the writing showcase that we put on. Or we could call it a text to world connection because I'm connecting to an event that happens regularly on campus. But we have 3 different connections here just on one page. You'll also notice that my use of underlining, it's pretty heavy, but it's also not taking up the entire page. I've underlined something up here in the small abstract that helps me know what the key offering or the main thing that this article is supposed to be giving me. I use arrows and I use stars. You can see down here that I even circled the date when this was published just so that I could file it in with the contemporary articles that were written around this time. So the last thing that we're going to talk about, and then we'll close out this mini lesson, is reflections. Reflections help us monitor our understanding or our comprehension. So when you write a summary of what you just read, or when you jot down what was the clearest or the muddiest point, these are types of reflective reading. You can monitor your understanding of the text itself. So this is the content of whatever text you're reading. You can also monitor your reading process. So this is monitoring how you're reading. Did you get stuck anywhere? What did you do? How did that come about? What happened? Was it circumstantial? Was it based on the text itself? What felt great? What was really easy to read? What was crappy? Where did you get stuck? These are questions that help us monitor our reading process, and these are things that help us monitor our understanding of the text. And we want to be able to do both. Okay, so I'm going to close out this mini. Happy active reading, everyone.